the day the CIA poisoned a French town. In the quiet, picturesque French village of Pont-Saint-Esprit, the morning of August 15, 1951, started like any other. Villagers bought their daily bread, children played in the cobblestone streets, and life went on. But by nightfall, that peace was shattered, and the town was plunged into a living nightmare. A man, utterly convinced he was an airplane, leaped from a second-story window, breaking both his legs but still trying to run. An 11-year-old boy tried to strangle his own mother. People screamed in the streets, fighting off invisible demons and imaginary beasts. One man cried out that red flowers were blossoming from his body, and his head was turning to molten lead. The local doctor would later call it the night of the apocalypse. Hundreds of people were suddenly in the grip of terrifying hallucinations and violent psychosis. For decades, this mass insanity was blamed on a simple loaf of bread. But buried in archives and championed by one journalist, a far more sinister theory came to light. That this wasn't just a tragic accident, it was a secret, horrifying experiment. The cursed bread. The horror in Pont-Saint-Esprit didn't arrive all at once. It began subtly on August 15th, with what seemed like a nasty wave of food poisoning. Victims complained of stomach pains, nausea, and vomiting. But within a day, the symptoms ballooned into something far more terrifying. The sickness gave way to cold sweats, insomnia, and a state of intense delirium. What followed was a complete break from reality for a huge portion of the town. More than 250 people were affected. The local asylum was quickly overwhelmed, with 50 people needing to be institutionalized, many held in straitjackets to keep them from hurting themselves or others. The psychosis was so severe that at least 7 people died. Survivors described the experience in chilling detail. One postman remembered being tormented by hallucinations of serpents coiling around his arms as his body shrank. Another was found trying to walk across the cables of a suspension bridge, believing he was a tightrope walker. People saw flames where there were none and heard heavenly choirs or demonic screams. A woman sobbed, convinced her children had been ground into sausages. The collective trauma was so deep that the event became forever known in French folklore as Le Pain Maudit, the cursed bread. The immediate investigation focused on the one thing most victims had in common. They'd all bought their bread from the same local bakery, run by a man named Roch Bryant. The conclusion seemed simple, if tragic. The baker's flour must have been contaminated. The cursed bread was the source of the madness. But what exactly was it contaminated with? The official explanation. The leading scientific theory quickly pointed to ergotism, a type of poisoning from a fungus called Claviceps purpurea, which grows on rye in wet seasons. The summer of 1951 had been particularly damp, creating the perfect conditions for the fungus to grow. Historically, this made a lot of sense. Ergotism, also known as St. Anthony's fire, was blamed for similar outbreaks of mass hysteria throughout European history, with some historians even thinking it played a role in events like the Salem witch trials. The alkaloids in the ergot fungus are chemically similar to lysergic acid, the basis for LSD, and are known to cause both the stomach problems and the wild psychoactive effects seen in the village. The case seemed plausible. A bad batch of rye, tainted with ergot, was milled into flour and baked into the bread that drove a whole town insane. But even at the time, this theory had some holes. Some experts, like the president of the French Millers' Union, questioned the diagnosis, arguing that small amounts of ergot were common in flour, and couldn't explain how severe this outbreak was. Later investigations cast even more doubt. An early report from a military lab that tested town samples supposedly found no trace of the ergot fungus. While ergotism has remained the most widely accepted academic explanation for decades, the lingering questions left the door wide open for other, more disturbing possibilities. A new theory emerges. For nearly 60 years, the story of the cursed bread was a bizarre but mostly settled piece of history. Then, in 2009, a new, explosive, and highly controversial theory dragged the incident from medical history into the dark world of Cold War espionage. Investigative journalist Hank P. Albarelli, Jr., in his book, A Terrible Mistake, claimed he had uncovered evidence of a far more deliberate cause. Albarelli's allegation was stunning. The poisoning in Pont-Saint-Esprit wasn't an accident. He claimed it was a secret field test of a new psychological weapon, LSD, conducted on an unsuspecting civilian population by the CIA and the U.S. Army's Special Operations Division. According to Albarelli, he found declassified CIA documents while looking into the suspicious 1953 death of Frank Olson, a CIA biochemist and a top researcher in the agency's biological warfare program. Albarelli reported finding a cryptic note among Olson's files that read, "Re Pont Saint-Esprit and F. Olson files. Tell him to see to it that these are buried." This breadcrumb led Albarelli down a rabbit hole of Cold War paranoia. He alleged that the CIA, working with the Sandoz Chemical Company in Switzerland, the very lab where Dr. Albert Hofmann first synthesized LSD, used the French town as a human laboratory. He even cited what he claimed was a 1954 CIA report where a Sandoz representative supposedly told an agent the secret of Pont Saint-Esprit was that it wasn't ergot at all. It's a shocking claim, but it's important to state that this document has not been independently verified, and the theory remains highly speculative. The case for a conspiracy. On the surface, it sounds like a spy thriller, but in the context of the era, it becomes chillingly plausible. In the early 1950s, the CIA was consumed by fears that the Soviets and Chinese had developed mind-control drugs to use against American agents. This fear gave birth to one of the most notorious and illegal programs in CIA history, Project MKUltra, officially launched in 1953. Though related programs were already active, MKUltra was a top-secret project to find a truth serum and explore ways to control the human mind. The methods were horrifying. The CIA secretly gave high doses of drugs, especially LSD, to thousands of unwitting American and Canadian citizens, mental patients, prisoners, and even random members of the public. They operated through front organizations at over 80 universities, hospitals, and prisons, all to see if these drugs could be weaponized. Proponents of the Pont Saint-Esprit theory point to this documented history of unethical human experimentation as the motive. Why this town? It was small, isolated, and its post-war infrastructure made it a perfect contained environment for a test. The death of Frank Olson, the biochemist whose files supposedly mentioned the town, adds another layer of suspicion. His death was ruled a suicide, but his family has always maintained he was murdered after wanting to leave the CIA, horrified by his work. However, the evidence connecting any of this to the French village is entirely circumstantial. While the CIA did destroy most MKUltra files in 1973, making a full investigation impossible, there is no smoking gun. No surviving document explicitly states we poisoned Pont Saint-Esprit. Counter-arguments, and the unresolved mystery. Despite the compelling narrative, the CIA theory is not accepted by most mainstream historians. Many experts, including historian Stephen Kaplan, who wrote an exhaustive book on the incident, have heavily criticized Albarelli's claims, arguing there is absolutely no evidence for them. Kaplan points out that the symptoms don't perfectly align with LSD poisoning. For one, the sickness began with severe digestive issues, which aren't a primary feature of LSD. Also, the symptoms took 24 to 36 hours to appear, whereas LSD usually takes effect in under an hour. This brings most researchers back to the ergotism theory as the most likely, if imperfect, explanation. Other theories have been floated, like contamination by mercury from a fungicide or by nitrogen trichloride, a chemical illegally used to bleach flour. But just like the CIA theory, these lack definitive proof. So we're left with competing stories. On one hand, a natural phenomenon, ergot poisoning, that has historical precedent but doesn't quite fit all the facts of this case. On the other, a government conspiracy theory, rooted in the CIA's documented willingness to perform horrifying experiments, but which lacks any direct conclusive evidence and is dismissed by most experts. The truth remains buried under decades of scientific debate, government secrecy, and local trauma. The people of Pont Saint-Esprit were left with the scars of an event they could never fully explain. For them, it wasn't a historical puzzle, it was a real-life apocalypse. So what really happened in the summer of 1951? Was the village of Pont Saint-Esprit the victim of a freak natural poisoning, a tragic accident of moldy rye that drove hundreds mad, or were its citizens the unwitting guinea pigs in a terrifying Cold War experiment, their minds sacrificed for national security? We have the official story of the cursed bread, a tale of a medieval poison making a comeback in the 20th century. And we have the shadow story of MKUltra, a tale of a government so paranoid that it turned on its own ideals and allegedly on the people of a small French town. To this day, there is no definitive answer. No one was ever held truly accountable for the 7 deaths and the hundreds of shattered lives, The files that might have provided a final answer were likely destroyed decades ago, leaving the mystery to haunt history. Whether it was mold or mind control, one thing is certain. In August 1951, the people of Pont Saint-Esprit didn't just eat bad bread, they swallowed a secret. The official story and the conspiracy theory both leave unanswered questions. What do you believe is the most likely explanation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to explore more historical mysteries, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.